Hello, darling.
Hello, Nick.
I just need to tell you something. This lady and her dear friend Phyllis Proctor, this is Eileen Skidmore. Do I need to tell you? Of course not. She and Phil have been my two constant friends for nearly 40 years. 41 years, in fact. And I love these two girls. Phyllis, stand up. They run my Nick Tate fan club, as if you didn't know. And if you haven't joined, then you should, because they got fantastic newsletters. And I believe they can even go back into the archives and pull out the old ones if you want them. There's some great stuff in there. And now, of course, it's all electronic. And they know more about me than my wife. Seriously, they know more about me than I do. So, are we going to share that mic?
Is this live? Is this okay? Is it working?
Hello, can you hear me? I mean, can you hear me or the microphone? Where's the microphone, guys? Is this working, sir?
Should be.
Should be. Try the other one. What about that? Unaccustomed as I am. Okay, now, of course you'll all get a chance to ask me some questions, but Eileen has some very carefully prepared questions here for me, right?
Well, we thought the first thing to talk about was you come from a show business family, so naturally you're inclined to go into show business.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how it all started?
No.
No.
Oh, all right. Now that you forced me. Yeah. I'm actually third generation. I mean, I guess most of you have heard this, so I'll try and keep it brief. My grandfather, his name was Adolphus Carglin. He was a vaudevillian performer in Ireland. He was born in Belfast, in County Derry. Not in County Derry, but near Belfast, and then he went and lived in County Derry. And in fact, I went there last year. I came to Autographica last year to sign for Space 1999. It was an extraordinary experience in Birmingham, and I spent time with Eileen and Phil there. And then I went on over to Ireland to try and track where my grandfather had lived. And I don't think Derry's changed all that much, to tell you the truth. It was extraordinary to sit in some of the places where he'd sat, some of the taverns and the hotels, and walk the streets, the old walled streets of Derry. But my grandfather died, sadly, in Australia when my mother was 8 years of age. So she really didn't even know him, let alone I didn't know him at all. But he was a vaudevillian, and he married my grandmother, who was a young actress. I believe they didn't meet in Ireland. I think they met in London, and he took her to Australia at the turn of the century. And my mother, they were married in England, I think, and they were married, and they went out to Australia with a double act. My grandmother could sing and dance, and she had a bad accident and hurt a hip, so she pretty much had to give that kind of part of show business away. But they had this very showy daughter whose name was Neva Carglin. That was my mother, and my mother became the #1 actress in Australian radio and theatre throughout the 30s and 40s. She in fact came and worked in England for a while. Golders Green Hippodrome. Have you heard of Nicky Henson?
Yeah.
Well, Nicky Henson's father was a man, I think his name was, oh gosh, I shouldn't be forgetting this. Nicky Henson was born a few weeks before I was born. And my mother had worked in Nicky's father's company. He was a star actor. Henson. Was it Basil Henson? Anybody remember what Nicky's father's name was? He had a very deep voice, just like Nicky. Nicky's got that same voice. And my mother worked in his company before she went to work and star in the West End of London in a thing called Nina Rosa, which was a musical. And she danced and sang as a Mexican temptress. She had jet black hair and very, very dark blue eyes. She was very exotic, my mother, very beautiful. And she married, came back to Australia, after went to South Africa and toured there, and then went to England and lived in England until almost the war broke out. And strangely enough, she married a man who was an Australian grazier, very, very wealthy man, multi-millionaire by today's standards. And he went to see her in Nina Rosa and fell in love with her in the theatre. And he became a stage door Johnny, coming back to see her constantly, and wanted her to come back to Australia and be his wife and live the land of the rich on a sheep station, not a cattle station, in Australia. I don't know why my mother ever did it, because she'd done a film in England called Squeaker, and it was a bit of a hit. It starred O'Brien. What was his name? Edmund O'Brien. Yes, indeed. And I think Claudette Colbert. And my mother had a nice role in that film, and then they wanted her to be in their next film. And this was like 1938, 39, and the winds of war were brewing. And he got wind of it, this grazier, and he went back to Australia and he said, "Come home and marry me." And he went back to Australia and sent all sorts of presents trying to woo her to come back. And she was waiting for this wretched film to start. And she finished in the theatre and the film still hadn't started. And he kept on wooing her and wooing her. So she went back to Australia and she married him in Sydney, and then he took her out to the outback of Australia on a farm, and she lasted 1 week. And came running back to Sydney, and that was the end of their marriage, sadly. And she went straight back into show business in Sydney. And unfortunately, the war broke out. And 1939, she fell in love with a young Australian actor by the name of John Tate, who was my father. My mother was older than him and very successful. And that was not actually a very good mix in the end, because her career kept on going up and up and up. And he did very well. He was a wonderful actor, actually. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the film On the Beach that starred Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner and Fred Astaire. He played a racing car driver. Well, my father played the Admiral of the Australian Navy in that film. He had the largest role, Australian-speaking role in the film. He was one of the star actors of the film, but he wasn't known. And Stanley Kramer, who directed the film, thought my father was wonderful and said, "You must come back to America. I can introduce you to everybody." My father didn't want to leave Australia. He loved where he was. He loved his life. And I think he was frightened at the big time. He later did another film, it was a wonderful film about a sheep shearer in Australia, and he didn't have a very large role, but that director also loved him. The Sundowners, the film was called. It was a wonderful film, and they wanted him to come back to America too. So by this stage, my mother and father had broken up, and I was going in and out of theatre all the time. As a young kid, and radio stations, and I was the child of star actors who were extremely well known, and it was to me it was very normal. But I would have parents coming up to me and saying, "You must come home to lunch with us." I wondered why parents wanted me to come home to lunch with them. They wanted my mother to bring me so that they could meet my mother, you know. And it wasn't like the paparazzi of today. But there was a paparazzi that existed in Australia, and they did have the red carpet, and every time there was an opening night, my mother was swan down the red carpet and the lights would go off, and I would be standing somewhere in the background with my grandmother, who used to be my constant chaperone. And she had been the actress many years before herself. So I got into show business. I started working as a young actor. I had a very good singing voice. And the Sydney Opera Company heard me in school productions and offered me Manotti's Amal and the Night Visitors, which is a Christmas opera. And I played Amal, and I sang for the Sydney Opera Company. I was very lucky. I had a very strong soprano voice. And I was swept away by the lights and the magic of actually working with a professional opera company, and I couldn't wait to leave school. I was hopeless at school. I couldn't concentrate on my classes ever. I'm partially dyslexic, so my spelling was atrocious. My French was so bad that I got -2 out of 100 in French, and the French lady said to me, "I think maybe you shouldn't take French next year." And I went, "Okay, great." You know, stopped having to do French, and I would spend every day at school if I could, in the music department singing and doing drama, and they all thought that I was a gay little puff, they used to call me, and a gay little puff's always down there singing and dancing around, should be doing his school classes. Fortunately for me, I was pretty good at rugby, so I had a bit of a crossover. I was everything, and I loved it, but I was hopeless at school, and I couldn't wait to get out, and I did a production of Mikado, and I played Coco. I don't know if you know the Mikado. Coco was the Lord High Executioner. It's a very, very funny role, and I discovered that comedy is my penchant, and I was still a good singer in those days. Unfortunately, when my voice broke, it didn't really translate into anything. I just, so you can see, right, it didn't work. So, which was sad for me, because I loved singing and I loved opera. But you know, you can't have everything in life. And I was talking to some of the folks last night that were here about success and failure. I think I've had more failure in my life than I've had success. I've had a lot of success. And so people were going, "Oh, you know." I said, "No, don't feel bad for me. I think you learn much more from failure than you do from success." Because living in America now, as I do, I live near and work around a lot of people who have been born into very wealthy families and inherited a lot of money and inherited jobs and sort of born with a silver spoon type thing. And then when their companies get into trouble, they can't handle the failure. And they go crazy and they have to go to psychiatrists. Some of them commit suicide, and, you know, they may have a job for 30 or 40 years and that's all they ever know. And then when it starts getting into trouble, it goes under, and all the money in the world is not going to buoy them up and support them, and their lives fall apart. Well, as an actor, you know, if you're in a show and the show is, even if it's successful, it's going to run 6 months maybe. It might run a year. It might run 2 years. You might even be in a successful television show that runs 3 years. And it doesn't matter how successful it is. At the end, it's going to finish. And you're out of a job. You know, some of these people that have been working for 20 years, they're suddenly out of a job, and they want to commit suicide. For me, and for most actors that I know, we lose our jobs every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe every 2 or 3 months, certainly every 2 or 3 years. It's all over, and you start all over again. So I'm very used to success and failure, and I think I learned and have learned a great deal from, you know, the heartbreaks and the sadness of things ending. It was a great heartbreak for me when Space 1999 finished. We had, you know, in the first series, the first year, they took 15 months to make the first series. We spent 6 weeks on the first episode. You know, an hour-long episode, which really is only about 48 minutes of actual finished acting time when we put all the commercials and everything in it. And television series in America, hour-long series, take 9 days to shoot. The fact that we spent 6 weeks on the pilot was unheard of. We virtually made a feature film. And I was very lucky that I happened to be playing a character in the first episode that was going to be killed. Goodbye. I wasn't going to be in the show. I think most of you know that. But the director, Lee Katzin, during the preparation of those 6 weeks and during the time we did all the tests and everything that we did, he kept on looking at me and saying, "You understand the camera, don't you?" He said. "A lot of people that are new to this, they don't really understand it like you do." He didn't realize that I'd done 3 television series in Australia before I came to America. That was my gain, and whoever was about to play Alphonse Gattani's loss, because the Italian actor did not get the part in the end, didn't come. They had to find somebody to take that role, and Alphonse Gattani became Alan Carter, and Lee Katzin chose me to play that role, and spoke to Sylvia and Jerry about it. I had to do a bit of auditioning. I think most of you know those hilarious stories about me getting the part, trying to get me to do Italian, which I couldn't. Lee saying, well, try German, and I tried German. I was getting worse and worse and worse, and in the end he said, oh, Jesus, he said, look, the guy's Australian, why don't you let him play an Australian? And Sylvia and Jerry both went, no, there's no Australians in space. I said, there's no bloody English in space either. What are you talking about? He said, see, that's the guy. That's who we should have in the role, Anyway, it's a long story, but that's how that happened. And how did I get talking about this? We're talking about my family. Anyway, yeah, I'm from showbiz. Next question.
Right,
Yes, I do. I love you, Eileen. Go on.
Okay. Well, you've got a film come out later this month, isn't it? Lupin?
Oh, yeah.
A little bit back now.
Yeah, okay. Okay, you might say, well, gee, we haven't seen Nick doing much. And it's true, I don't do much now. I'm 72 years of age. I'm too old to work now. No, I don't have to work, thank God. But I like working, I don't ever want to stop. My mother died in the middle of a job. She was doing a television series and didn't show up one day. Somebody finally went round to her house and she was dead on the floor. I mean, I adored my mother. Don't make it sound like I'm callous. It broke my heart, as it does all of us when our folks die, But she was doing what she loved. And I hope I will be too. I hope that I'll be at the peak of some great moment on stage. You can all go, oh! And I'll done again. And then I get a big round of applause, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But, yeah, occasionally somebody's silly enough to offer me a role. In the last few years, let's see now, I just made a quick note so that I could tell you. I've done Lupin III, which is a Japanese film. It's about a very famous character right throughout Asia called Lupin, who is a master criminal. And in this particular story, he is brought into a magnificent home with all the young master criminals because there's this kind of network of guys that steal things, and their hero in life is this old guy who lives in a huge mansion in Hong Kong, and I played that character. And I was very lucky that they asked me to do it. This is one of those things where I didn't audition for the film, which was extraordinary. I got a call. The Japanese company wanted me to do it. I was the only English-speaking actor in the film. A couple of years before that, I went out to China and I did a film called Chen Shui-san, and that was a huge film in China. It'll never be seen in the West because it was way too propagandist. And the character that I played an American general in that thing. And I've seen the film, and they basically, I didn't have horns sticking out at the top of my head, but I might as well have had the way they shot me. They somehow or other made my character look dark and green. It was amazing. And when I went to China afterwards to the premiere, they had vast billboards up in the sky. 20 stories high, these huge billboards up there with the photograph of the main lead and his wife, because Chen Shui-san was a famous Chinese inventor who was brought to America in 1935 by one of the universities in America because he was a genius scientist and they wanted to put him onto the rocket program. He eventually wound up helping to make the atomic bomb. And when communism struck, and when the McCarthyism struck in the early 50s in America, a lot of very innocent people and a lot of people that only just vaguely toyed with communism were branded as communists and thrown out of their jobs and their careers and lost all sorts of friends. And this wonderful Chinese scientist that was working in America and had been loyal to America since 1935 was suddenly accused of being a commie, and they wanted to send him back to China. And my character had been a friend of his. I played Colonel Dan. I'll think of it in a minute. And anyway, I go to the president and say, you can't send this man back to China. he knows how to make the bomb, and he will tell them. And all the other scientists in America say, don't be ridiculous. He's one human being. We're not going to give him any of the paperwork. We can let him go. He's not going to be able to make the bomb. And I said, oh yes, you will. This guy's a genius. You're making a big mistake. Dan Kimball, Colonel Dan Kimball, and Kimball was right. Chen Shui-san was railroaded out of America and sent back to China, and within 3 years he made the atomic bomb for China. And he was a champion in China, and they made this magnificent film about him. But my character really did look like he had horns coming out of the top of his head. I don't know if any of you have seen Chen Shui-san. Anybody seen it? No. It was so propagandist, it's amazing. Anyway, it's a wonder that I even accepted another Asian film, but I really did enjoy being in China. That was a fabulous time in my life. And if any of you have been to China, then you'll know what I'm talking about. It is a sensational place. I was very worried about going there. I was thinking to myself, hey, you know, there's a third world, it's going to be horrible. Yeah, sure, a lot of it's very sad. But some of it is mind-bogglingly beautiful, and Shanghai is probably the most modern city on the planet. It is extraordinary. I've never seen so many Lamborghinis, Porsches, and Rolls Royces in my life. And I've seen a lot of them in Beverly Hills. Well, Shanghai is very, very rich, very wealthy, very advanced, and Beijing is nearly there as well. And I didn't go to too many other cities, but extraordinary wealth in China. And they don't have to have a war to take over the world. They're taking over the world financially, and they will do it, and we just better stay friends with them. Seriously. Anyway, Lupin. So I get asked by this Chinese company to come and make Lupin III. I don't know anything about it, but I go, and I had a ball. It was much easier because all the Japanese producers, they wanted to shoot in Thailand, so we shot it in Bangkok, and it was amazing. I really enjoyed working on that film. They nearly all speak English there, so that was magnificent for me, because when I was in China, for the 6.5 weeks I was in China, nobody on the film crew spoke English, not even the translator, which was really weird, because, you know, I'd be doing my scenes and the finish, and the director, who had been in America for a little while, so he'd go to the translator, okay. And she goes, okay. She comes over to me, she says, do it same, only better. Hang on a minute. He talked to you for about 10 minutes about what he wants me to do. All he said was, do it same, only better? Yes. This woman drove me crazy, you know, because I know that this man was giving her explicit. I mean, maybe she did what, there was some guy at the Olympics that pretended he could translate for the Olympics and really couldn't. Do you know that story? Well, it was like working with that person, you know. And she always had a smile. Oh, Mr. Lee. She was always so nice to me, you know. In fact, she was responsible for getting me the part. This is weird how you get parts. Oh, I didn't tell you. With Lupin III, I didn't know how I got the role, but they invited me to do it, and I thought this is wonderful. One of the producers came to me when I was working one day, and I mean, I'd seen him every day. He was always so incredibly diplomatic, very Japanese, always bowing to me, and he was a beautiful man, and sometimes I'd have lunch with him, and he told me that he'd spent time in Australia. He'd gone to Perth and to high school, and he remembered me from some productions in Australia. He said, that's where I first knew you from. And he said, then he pulled out Space 1999, right? He said, please, you sign my Space 1999 book. And I signed the book, and I said, are you the reason I'm on this film? He said, oh yeah, I tell him. So you see, Space 1999 did get me a film eventually. So that's how I got Lupin III. Lupin III opened in in Japan 2 weeks ago. It hasn't had rave reviews, but it's had pretty damn good reviews, and I've just heard, because I'm about to get on the plane and fly here I went to LA, went to New York, and I spent time with my daughter, who was working as a stylist in New York, and they've just had Fashion Week in New York, so we went to a couple of the shows that she was doing, and I'm fiercely proud of my daughter, Jessie Tate. It was just so wonderful to see her in operation there with 22 girls going down the catwalk and coming back again, and she organized the whole shebang. Very proud of her. So anyway, I'm in New York doing that. I'm about to get on the plane and come here, and my iPhone goes off and I check, and it's from my Australian agent saying that the Lupin producers were about to do a special presentation of Lupin in LA on Friday night, and they wanted me as a guest. And this is Wednesday night in New York. I'm flying to be here for Thursday morning, yesterday when I arrived. And they've invited me to be Chinese Grauman's Theatre for the special presentation of Lupin. So obviously I'm here with you and not there. So I could have turned around and said, that's the kind of guy I am. See, I who needs fame and fortune and red carpet? I'd much rather be here with you guys. Anyway, the ticket was paid for. I had to come. So, I don't know. I don't know what will happen to Lupin. It's a huge. It's kind of like the Batman character. Nothing like the Batman character, but I mean, the adoration of Lupin throughout the Asian world is huge. I told my son, who's 35 and works in LA for Hulu. I said, have you ever heard of Lupin? And he said, yeah. He said, some of the guys were talking about that the other day. Is some kind of Asian big television series thing? And I went, yeah. So he then went and asked them, and many of the people that work, I don't know if you know what Hulu is. If you know what Netflix is, Hulu is like Netflix. It's a big company. There was here for a while in England. Didn't work too well here, but it's very big in America. They have any television series that you want to see, you go on to Hulu and you can become a member, and electronically you get every episode, just like Netflix, Except Netflix does mostly films, some television. Hulu does television series, and they said that Lupin was a cult character right the way throughout Asia, not just Thailand and Japan, right throughout Asia. He's their favorite character because he's kind of like Robin Hood in a sense. He is very charismatic, good at what he does, and he robs the rich. He doesn't so much give to the poor as keep it himself. And that's the funny part about Lupin. Very sexy women. It was always drawn, and you look at some of the cartoons of Lupin, the artistry is amazing. The men are real tough Japanese spy-looking guys with hats pulled down, always smoking cigarettes, and the women are drop-dead gorgeous. And indeed, on the film, the guy that played the lead is sort of like the Brad Pitt of Japan. His name was Ruhe. He's known as Ruhe. They got one name, And her name was Mesa, and she was gorgeous. I do have pictures, which I can show some of you if you ask me later on.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. I'll show you, Eileen. Yes, definitely. From the movie, I played a very weird, wonderful, extremely wealthy guy who was sort of his mentor. Lupin loved him, and everybody wanted to be like him. It was a very interesting thing to do. They built me this huge mansion in Thailand to look like it was at the top of a mountain in Hong Kong, and it was set in a way out in the back of Thailand, behind Bangkok, behind a supermarket. There was this old field, and it was filled with cow dung and swamp and mosquitoes and crap. And overnight, well, probably a week, they built this mansion. And all around the mansion, they had these big blue screens everywhere, so that they could blue screen it. The actual mansion they built was there, and it worked. It was perfect. Upstairs, downstairs. The only thing it didn't have was a toilet in it. Right? And the day we finished the film, bulldozers came in, they pulled this thing down. I mean, it was bigger than this room we're in. It was a huge mansion with big blue screens all around it so that they could just make that look like it sat on a hill. I can't wait to see the film, to see how they sat it on top of the hill in Hong Kong. And my character was extremely wealthy, getting in and out of Rolls Royces and all sorts of stuff. So that was an interesting film to do. What else have I done? I don't know if any of you have seen it, but 2 years ago I did The Killer Elite. I played Clive Owen's boss with Jason Statham and Robert De Niro. I liked that film. It wasn't one of the ones that the Jason Statham, I mean, he really kicks butt in that film, and it was very interesting that Clive Owen could go all the way with him. Clive is an extraordinary actor, a beautiful man, lovely person to work with, like being with royalty, lovely demeanor. Jason was quiet and tough and pretty much kept to himself. I never worked with him on the film physically, so I don't know whether we would have become best friends or not. But I know that I worked with Clive every day, and that was a joy. Anybody seen Killer Elite? Quarter of you. Go see it. You can rent it. It's a good kick-ass movie. I play a very superior British ex-SAS officer. Pretty nasty bastard, really. I've done a couple of episodes of Pretty Little Liars last year, that very popular ABC TV series in America. That was fun to do. I think most of you know I was in Lost, and that's old hat, just the one episode of Lost. But when I did the Chen Shui-sen film, I asked the casting director in China how they cast me, thinking he might have said, "Oh, space nothing, nothing, nothing." But he didn't. He said, "Oh, you in Rust." I said, "Excuse me?" I've never done anything called Rust. He said, "Oh, you in Rust. Oh, island with airplane crash. Rust. Oh, we have Rust." Great, good, okay, yeah, that was the closest I ever got to anybody speaking English to me in China. He did it much better than I did. What else? Can't even read my... Oh, well, yeah, you know the Star Trek Next Gen things, you've seen those. Oh, I've just done a film with Tim Roth. It's called Chronic. And Chronic is a story with Tim Roth. He is a male nurse who goes around to people's homes looking after people that are dying. This is an extraordinarily funny film. No, it is desperately sad. And I play his father, and we don't like each other. So it's a very sad film. Really? But Tim Roth was lovely to work with. I don't do very much in the film. It's not my film. It's Tim Roth's film. But that's the last thing that I've done. I did that only a couple of weeks ago. Well, no, a couple of months ago. My timing's way out. I may be in a film called Truth. It's shooting in Australia next month, and we're negotiating right now. Robert Redford and Cate Blanchett. It's actually set in America, but they're shooting it in Australia. And I was going back to Australia and New Zealand to shoot a film called Light Between Two Oceans. I don't know if anybody, or Light Between Oceans it's called, but it's at the Antarctic and the Indian Ocean where they meet. It's a lighthouse 200 miles off the coast of Perth. And I was negotiated for in that film, and I wound up not actually wanting to do the deal. I was going to have to spend a lot of time out in lighthouses and on boats, and I didn't like the character very much. I really wanted to do the film, and I thought about it a lot, and I'm kind of at that time in my life now where I don't have to work if I don't want to work, and I don't get many choices and offers, so it was kind of strange that it didn't turn out, but I stood my ground. I know what I wanted, and they knew what they wanted, and it didn't work out, but it nearly did. And you know, I touched briefly on the success and failure thing in life, and for me, it's often been like that, you know. I don't really count not getting a job that was originally offered to me as failure, but I can't call it success either. It's just that we actors spend a great deal of our time in life with a project that may happen, They send you the script, you read it, you love it or you hate it, or you think maybe I can make it work. Sometimes I've not liked scripts and wound up doing them eventually, and it's the best thing I've ever done, you know, and I think, well, maybe I shouldn't read the script first because I'm obviously not a good choice. You know, I don't make good choices. Other times people have wanted me to play a character in a film or a show, and I've looked at it and thought, no, I should be playing this other character, and I've had to go to the director and say, well, I'd love to be in it, but I don't want to play him. I want to play this other guy, you know. And they go, oh, no, you're not right for that. And that was one of those occasions, because I wanted to play another character in this film, not the character that he wanted me to play. And so I said, no, if you want me, I want to do that. No, he wanted me for the other role, and so it didn't work out. I mean, the guy still might drown and they'll ring me up and say, would you come and do it? I don't know, but I'm not praying and I'm not holding my breath. It's just the way this business is, you know. A lot of things might happen, and oftentimes the girls, Eileen and Phil, are always asking me to send information about what I'm doing, because people want to know. And I do, and I can write a great deal about, you know, all the weeks, and I'm talking weeks we negotiated for Between Two Oceans, Light Between Two Oceans. And now I'm not doing it. So how embarrassing is that? You know, if they, in fact, I think you might have even printed the fact that I was probably going to Australia to do it, because that was the last thing I told them. Well, I'm not. So you can rip that up if you see it. Unless they say the guy drowns, and then I will go and do it. I pretty much covered the things that I've just been doing recently. I still do quite a lot of voiceovers. I work for a company in Australia every week, even though and in fact I just did it from New York. I carry my recording equipment with me, and I put one hand over one ear like that, and I get right next to the microphone, and I do my voiceover voice. Once upon a time in America. That shit, you know. But the ones that I do in Australia is on Triple M, and I got to be really Australian where I'm doing them, because sometimes I'll kind of say can't, and the bloke at the other says, hey Nick, can't stop doing that bloody American poofter stuff. You're an Australian, mate, you know. So I've got to get, yeah, okay, mate. I'm talking about the footy. Come and see the footy. The NRL on Triple M tomorrow, you know. I get really excited, play all sorts of things for them. I do it every Wednesday. Well, it's their Wednesday. It's their Wednesday, it's my Tuesday in America. I do a couple of hours in my little booth. I've got a booth under the stairs in the house. All my microphone equipment is set up. I used to do it using ISDN. I don't do that anymore. I now am able to talk with them on Skype, and I record it on my computer and I send it to them on Dropbox. About every 4 or 5 minutes I stop and send, stop and send, stop and send. I might send them 10 or 12 parcels of 5 to 10 minutes of voice work, and then they re-edit it at the other end. It works fabulously. I mean, Dropbox is great for photographs. I'm sure you've used it yourselves for all sorts of things. It's brilliant for voiceover. And that's been a constant in my life for years. And when I'm in Australia or here, they want me to do it now. Because I'm flying back on Tuesday night, that's going to be a big problem. I've said to the guys, I can't do it unless you wait till your Thursday, my Wednesday, when I get back to LA. So they've agreed. I will keep the job. I've done it for 7 years now. I went to the south of France 2 years ago. I don't know if I've been able to talk to you, but that was a very interesting experience for me, because, I mean, I told you how good I was at French. My wife actually is fluent in French, and she never gets to speak it because there's nobody at home that will talk to her in French. So she's had a long plan and a long dream for us to go and live in France. And what's the point of going there for 2 weeks if you really want to spend time there and brush up? So I agreed that I would do it for 6 months. And 3 winters ago, in January, 3 years ago, we went to the south of France. And we stayed just outside of Fayence, which is, if any of you know France, you land in Nice airport, and you rent a car and drive down through Cannes, past Antibes, and you turn right and you go up into the mountains. Well, actually you get into the foothills. If any of you know of the area of Grasse, where they make beautiful perfumes, that's to the right. We turn left at there's a big lake, and man-made lake actually, or it used to be a lake, but then they've turned it into this vast dam up there, and That's about 10 miles long, and you drive it. It takes about an hour and a half to drive, and the French drivers are so fast on those tiny little roads. My wife used to be screaming, "Oh, what's over there? Oh my God!" It was terrible, and it was winter, so there was ice all over the roads. But the little cottage that we took in the south of France was a delight. It was 500 years old, probably a great deal older than that, but we could trace it back to 500 years old. The electricity, the winter was so bad 3 years ago in Europe. It was the worst winter in 40 years. And up around Germany, in areas like that, it was minus 40. And it was minus 20 in lots of places in France. And in the south of France, near Antibes and Cannes and Nice, it was minus 6 in the morning. Can you believe? I thought, whatever, because I'd been in the south of France in summer. And I guess I thought that I was going for summer. I took my golf clubs, I took my swimming costumes. None of that happened. We just had to dodge the ice and the snow all the time. I saw cars go off the road, round the corner in front of me, come around the corner, the car's upside down, and then with the wheels going, oh yeah, okay. And he was the guy that shot past me 5 minutes earlier, Terrifying. But I was offered a play in Australia, which meant that I had to leave the south of France 3 months after having gone there. And I went back and did a new David Williamson play called When Dad Married Fury. It was a wonderful story. I think I told this story in my last convention, so I'm not going to tell you the whole thing over again, but it was a story about a financier who has hundreds of clients, and during the great financial collapse that happened 2 years ago internationally, he ruins most of his clients, and 12 of his clients commit suicide by jumping out of tall buildings. And he runs away from Europe, where he's working, and comes back to Australia having apparently had a heart attack. And his 2 sons in their early 50s think Daddy's coming home to die, and we're going to get all these millions, because they knew. I mean, this is a black comedy, right? They knew that he cheated everybody. But Daddy arrives back in Australia, not only dying, but with a 27-year-old blonde pregnant bride on his arm. And it was one of the funnest parts I've had in many, many years. And I learnt it by walking through the hills of France beyond Fayence, screaming at the top of my lungs all these Australian obscenities that David Williamson so beautifully wrote for me. I had originally refused the role because I knew I was going to the south of France, and I flew back to Australia for a few weeks, as I do in Christmas. I'm going back again in Christmas. And my dear friend Di Morrissey, who's Australia's #1 authoress, used to be my girlfriend when we were kids. She was held a dinner for her 20th year as a writer and her 20th novel, and she invited me to go to it, and I luckily went to that just before I came back to go to the south of France. And I'd had the David Williamson play that I'd read, and I said, I can't do this. It was like King Lear. It was huge, but it was a comedy. And it was full of obscenities, as David Williamson is prone to do with his writing. And I'd said no, I didn't want to do it. It was just too hard. And I particularly wanted to fulfill the promise of my wife to spend 6 months in the south of France with her. That's the kind of guy I am. Anyway, I go to Di's dinner party, and there were 12 people at the dinner party, and Di has placed me sitting opposite David Williamson, who wrote the play. And this was the most embarrassing night of my life, because this guy is he's like the Alan Ayckbourn of Australia. He's written 40 plays actually. And one of his very first plays, his second play ever that he wrote, was called Don's Party. They made a film about it. Well, I played Don in the original play for him. And he's never forgotten me, and I've never forgotten him. I knew he was a wonderful author. He's never written another play that he said, I need you in the part. I want you to play the role, But, so he sits opposite me at the dinner party saying, why did you refuse my play? I think Catherine Schell has arrived.
Yes.
Hello, darling.
Hello.
So I'm going to stand down now. Just very briefly, I couldn't say no to David because he bent my arm. So I had to give up France after 3 months, go back and do this very, very funny play. And here I am sitting before you now. So I can answer, because nobody's asked me a question, I can answer one quick question before I stand down. Anybody got one? Yes?
Your 2 roles in Jag, were they just because you were a jobbing actor, or was there something more to them?
2 roles in Jag. It's funny. Yeah, you know, in my career, I've nearly always appeared twice in long-running television series, playing totally different characters. I played a New Zealand farmer who was accused of murdering somebody in that one episode. It was nice. I enjoyed it very much. 2 years later, they asked me to play a judge, an Australian judge in a law court. Obviously, I can play New Zealanders and Australians. Why wouldn't I do it? Yeah, I accept practically anything that's offered me on network television in America, because you'd be a fool to say no. Yes, I'm a jobbing actor. I will do those jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, if you see me walking